Hello, everyone. This is my Module 12, Copyright Laws. I put, does the risk outweigh the reward? What is happening and who is involved? Mr. Sample, that is me, principal of the St. Regis School. Mr. Brandon, he's a third grade teacher. Mrs. Evans is a PTA president. Mrs. Lynn is a library specialist and computer lab teacher. Mrs. Williams, who is a third grade teacher. St. Regis ordered software programs for the school, but they only ordered enough for Mrs. Lynn to use in the computer lab. So what happens is teachers now have to schedule a time to utilize this software in the computer lab. After a few months, a few teachers approached Mrs. Lynn and asked her to copy the programs so that they could supplement their teaching in their classroom. Mrs. Lynn thought it was a good idea and bought blank CDs to copy the software to hand out to the teachers. Mrs. Evans, who is the PTA president, volunteered in the library and helped Mrs. Lynn make the copies and was happy that she was saving the PTA money. Mrs. Williams was ecstatic to receive the copies, but Mr. Brandon did not take the copies because at his previous schools, they weren't allowed to make copies of purchased softwares. So Mr. Brandon brings the situation to me, and I address the issue with Mrs. Lynn. She gets a little defensive, saying that she's trying to save the district money and save the PTA money. But I stay calm and tell her that she is being resourceful, and I really do appreciate that. But what she is doing could get the district into trouble. Is there any legal or ethical issues? Mr. Brandon, who was uncomfortable with receiving the copies, and he refused to take them. Mrs. Lynn thought she was doing the school a favor by making the copies and giving them to the teachers, so they did not have to reserve computer lab time. I was unaware of anything happening until Mr. Brandon notified me one day after school. So what we have to do is we have to look at the fair use test to see if what Mrs. Lynn is doing is legal. I first looked at the purpose and character of the use. Will the materials be used non-commercially in a nonprofit education institution? If we were only looking at this test of the fair use, we would qualify to make the copies of the software because we're only using it in our school for individual student use. But when you add another part of the test, and that is the effect of your use on the market for or value of the work being copied. The question asks, what would happen if everyone did what we were doing? Would it deprive the copyright owner of sales? And this is our issue. Because of us making copies, it is depriving the company sales. In addition to fair use test, educators need to consider how the material is being used. In our case study, the computer software is being copied is the issue. According to Copyright 101, you can make backup copies of the computer software and make a single backup copy of the computer documentation. But you may not network software unless it is licensed for networking, and you may not exceed your license limitations for the software. Mr. Sample and Mrs. Lynn need to look at the purchase of the software and see what they can and can't do. If they don't know what exactly they purchased, then they need to communicate with the company they bought the software from. Section 3. Mrs. Lynn thought she was doing the district justice by copying the software and handing them out to the teachers. But in reality, she could be costing the district more money by possible legal actions by the software company. Facts. Who's involved? Mr. Sample, me, the principal, Mrs. Lynn, library specialist, Mr. Brandon, third grade teacher, Mrs. Williams, third grade teacher, Mrs. Evans, PTA president, the PTA in general, 420 students, and there's 20 teachers at the school. Where are we located? St. Regis is in a small town, 25 miles from a larger city. We teach at St. Regis School. We have 2 grocery stores, 1 drugstore, and other small businesses. We're a small public school. We rely on 2 major fundraisers to help finance the school. Our school's annual budget provides basic materials for teachers, including purchasing computers or software. We have 2 teachers per grade. We have 1 SPED teacher for K4 and 1 SPED teacher for 5 through 8. If I, as a principal, would continue to allow Mrs. Lynn make copies for our staff, this situation could be damaging to our school and community. Because if the software company found out about what was going on at St. Regis, they could sue us for damages. If they do that, our school would not be able to recover and possibly close down. Then we would lose our jobs for our teachers, and our students would have to be bused 25 miles from kindergarten through senior year. If we look, there was a Houston school that was doing the same thing, and they got sued for $9.2 million. And any school cannot withstand anything like that. Even if we don't get sued, I could get fired because I knew about the copying of the software and did nothing about it. Mrs. Lynn could get punished or even fired for making the copies of the software and distributing them to the staff. I would also talk to my superintendent to let him or her know about the situation and the steps we're going to take to remediate the actions. The computer software program is the only stakeholder that has not been contacted. And this is where I'm not for sure if we need to talk to the software company, because I or the school are not going to allow the copies to be used, and we're going to uninstall the softwares on the computers with no license. What are our options here, and what are our possible consequences? If I take no action, I could take no action as principal and allow Mrs. Lynn to continue to make the copies for our staff. What are some consequences? We could not get caught, and we could continue to use the software. But ethically, is that right? The software company could find out, and we could have litigation issues. Me and Mrs. Lynn could lose our jobs. I could call the software company and turn in Mrs. Lynn. I would terminate Mrs. Lynn for breaking the copyright laws. What are consequences? I could still get sued by the software company. I can get into trouble because I didn't let Mrs. Lynn have her due process. I could discipline Mrs. Williams for willingly take the software copies and influencing Mrs. Lynn to make them. What are some intermediate possibilities? I would take all the copied programs and uninstall them from the computers and then confiscate and destroy the CDs. I would create a contract for Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Williams to sign, stating that they will not knowingly break copyright laws. I would have Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Williams go to copyright laws training. I would work as a staff to develop the AUP and copyright training to get more buy-in from the staff. I'd provide examples of what might happen if we continue to break copyright laws. Evaluate. If I take no action, there is a possible pushback from the staff that don't believe that making the copies is ethical and may look for another job. We could also get into legal trouble and possibly lose our jobs. If I take the most comprehensible action and call the company to turn in Mrs. Lynn, she would most likely lose her job and never be able to find another one without having a bad reputation. I could lose the trust of all the staff that I didn't investigate and talk it through with the stakeholders, and I just jump to conclusions and getting rid of you for a mistake. Intermediate strategies. Logical idea to uninstall and confiscate the copied CDs. Make sure for our staff to understand that the action is unacceptable. I'd have it in writing that you talked with Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Williams and that you don't want them to break any more copyright laws. I would have them go to training so they completely understand what the laws mean, and they could come back and be leaders in our school and train the staff if needed. I would have the staff create an acceptable use policy and create a training for copyright laws. By having them do this creates more buy-in and have a better understanding of the policy and laws. I think showing what has happened to schools that broke the law will hammer home how important following the laws are. What is the best option? After communicating with all the stakeholders and truly understanding that Mrs. Lynn was trying to do the right thing in her mind, I would send her and Mrs. Williams to a training over copyright laws. If I couldn't find a training that would be worth their time, I would have them research and create a beginning of the year training for our staff at St. Regis. I don't want to embarrass them, so I could put them on our building leadership team that helps create topics for our in-services and beginning of the year trainings. I need Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Williams to be advocates for our school, and I can't lose them to other schools because I didn't handle this situation correctly and fairly. I would uninstall the software, or our technology department uninstall the software and destroy the copies unless we reached out to the company to ask for permission to use the software in that manner. Implementation. Meet with Mrs. Lynn, Mrs. Williams, and the superintendent to address the severity of their actions, and that will decide on their consequence, and we will decide on what their consequences will be. I will make sure we collect and uninstall all illegal software, and I would communicate with our superintendent to let him or her know that this has been completed. I would meet with our PTA to make sure they understand that we cannot make copies of software unless we have permission from the company. I would let them know that we appreciate everything they do, and we will do our best to find the best and cheapest resources to help save money. I would meet with Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Williams again to let them know that we appreciate them trying to be resourceful and save our district money. But we can't put ourselves in a situation that could cost us even more than a few more licenses of the software would cost. I would let them know that we're going to send them to training on copyright laws when they get back. When they get back, they're going to develop a training guide for our staff, so hopefully we don't have any more issues on copyright. I would evaluate all our existing programs to make sure that we're in compliance with the law. I would have Mrs. Lynn help me now that she is a pro from going to a training. I would put Mrs. Lynn in charge of looking for other resources we could use to save money or other cost-saving alternatives that we could implement. After the training and discussions, if Mrs. Lynn does not want to follow copyright laws, then we may have to make a change in her position. Here's my references. Thank you, and good luck in the rest of your classes.